So hi, Kate. Thank you again for joining me today. And I just want to do a quick introduction. Kate Miner is a business coach and the author of Figure It Out, How to Harness the Power of Resourcefulness and Achieve Success. And it's a great book and I totally recommend it. So just throwing this out there, would you say you're a resourceful person then?
Absolutely. Yeah, I pride myself on saying that's a great skill and attribute that I've acquired over the years.
Right, that's good to know because one of the first things you mentioned in the book is about mindset, isn't it? How important mindset it is. But, I think there was a part where you said your mind will default to thinking negative thoughts first. And it will binge watch negative thoughts, negative reactions, and all those what ifs over and over again. And I'm totally like guilty of that. So, how do you stop the mind's tendency towards like a negative bias and self doubt?
Yeah, so we call that a pattern interrupt. And it's easy to go down that spiral of this isn't going to work out, or what if I fail? And oh, that's not a smart decision. Everyone's going to judge me for that. And it's once you start that first thought, it's easy to come up with that second and third. And before you know it, you're just in this tunnel of, I've got to get away from this as quick as possible. So the only way to abrupt that is what we call pattern interrupt, which is where you do something where it just refocuses your mind and gets you away from that continuous negative thoughts into something more thought provoking. So, well, what if instead of, and what if it goes terribly? What if it went really, really well? What if there's a great opportunity that happens from this? What if I impact people? If I stop thinking about what could happen to me, what's going to happen to others? And if you can somehow trigger your brain, and I think questions is a great way to do that, just to give yourself that interrupt.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because actually, again, another bad habit is this constant failure feeling, isn't it? So there was another line where you said that failure is not an end result, it's part of the learning curve. And as long as you are still moving forward towards your goal, learning, pivoting, or adjusting along the way, then you're not failing. And so, how do you stop the feeling of failure, like getting in the way of the learning process? Because that just
Yeah, the
overwhelms me.
simple answer is you move the end, like you move the finish line. So if you put parameters or a deadline on something and you didn't achieve it, then just move it. Push it, add 3 weeks, add 6 months to it. So that way you can give yourself more of a runway to make adjustments, to continue doing what it is that you have been learning throughout that process, and give yourself that additional time to then start seeing the result that you wanted to be seeing that you're currently not.
That makes sense. And actually, I was just wondering because this totally kind of ties in with this. So, would you say life's mistakes are all happy little accidents?
Happy little accidents makes it seem like we don't have control over anything. And I think with human beings, one of the major superpowers we have is power of choice. So I don't believe that every single mistake's a happy little accident. I think that we do stumble upon some pretty amazing things and we find ourselves in the right spot at the right time. Um, and there are happy little accidents that happen along the way, but it's also really important to understand that we probably influenced a lot of those mistakes with our choices.
Oh God. And actually, this totally ties into this because I'm so guilty of this, which is when you start a habit, I will accidentally miss a day or two. And so, do you think you can still get back on track, with a habit, even if you miss those days?
Absolutely. And I can't tell you how many day ones I've had. I've had so many day ones. And I think that's a celebratory thing, is that when you get off track with a habit, or you get discouraged, or because you're not seeing the result and you give up, or you take time away from building that thing, it's so important that if it's important enough for you to go back and say, nope, I missed the boat, but I'm going to try again. I think that's more important than just disregarding it altogether. And it comes back to that idea that it's progress over perfection. Just because we don't have a perfect attendance with the habit that we want to be building doesn't mean we aren't making progress towards that habit.
Do you think that's why perhaps people find it really difficult to harness or realize like their potential for resourcefulness because they're always trying to achieve perfection?
Quite possibly. I think it does have a tendency to have that perfectionism, and also the humans were very impatient. Our biology is, we want everything, especially today, right? If our phone doesn't tell us everything every single moment all the time, we're like full of anxiety and we don't know what to do with ourselves. And so I think part of it is also not being patient enough, because there are going to be not just one challenge, but multiple challenges. And the art of being resourcefulness is still being able to figure out that next challenge. And then when you kind of get to, woohoo, I got over that, and then you're faced with another one, it's like, man, how many more are going to keep coming at me? And the more that you can creatively or uniquely jump over that one and get through and still keep pushing forward, I think has a lot to do with letting go of perfection and learning to be more patient.
God, yeah, that's it's so tough, isn't it? It's just, especially with constant sort of society bombarding you with the perfectionism, and also us ourselves bombarding ourselves with perfectionism. It's
Yeah.
so hard to escape, like like that mindset where
Mm-hmm.
it's better not to do it at all because you can't do it like
Well. Mm-hmm.
perfectly. So it's really annoying. And actually there was so many different, like, I think it was like almost like 15 components to like skills, traits you need for resourcefulness. Would you say, for example, resourcefulness can work without, say, adaptability or creativity, or one of the other sort of traits, or
Mm-hmm.
does it need to have all of those traits for it to actually function?
I think it can have, you can lean heavily, maybe 80% problem solving. Like if I'm a great problem solver versus creativity, or if I am more adaptable versus having the creative element. I think that it can be a balance of a few of those. I don't think it has to be all in on one that's going to get you through. I think sometimes when you're faced with a challenge, you need to be able to adapt, and you also need to be creative. You also need to be able to ask questions and be curious. So if I'm normally a curious minded person, but I don't find myself creative, I'm probably still going to barrel through that challenge, and vice versa. So I think it's just a unique kind of combination, and sometimes challenges may require more or one of those attributes than another challenge.
That does make sense. That totally makes sense. So it's not about using them all simultaneously at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's utilizing them when and if needed. But
Needed,
is that
right?
correct?
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that
it's not
makes
a
sense.
perfect 1/5 of the skill and 1/5 of the skill, and a mathematical formula. I think it's more of, what does the situation require me to be right now? Do I need to be more curious? Do I need to be skeptical? Do I need to be adaptable, creative? What's going to get me through? Where am I? And just kind of knowing when to tap into the skills that you have.
That's really cool, because that's a bit of a relief, to be fair, because I was just like, oh my God, how do I utilize all this at the same time? But this is great. Yeah. And actually, there was that really interesting, I think, survey with the Business Journal, which was about that it discovered that 80% of people said they were unhappy and would like to quit their current job. So I was like, oh dear
Yeah.
Lord, that's terrible. And so, what do you recommend for people stuck in their jobs who don't necessarily have like the financial means to change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a tough one. So I think first and foremost, it's really important for them to find what got them stuck, right? What is it about their current circumstance that they are unhappy with? And then to identify what's going to help them become happier. Because if we're looking to make a professional move or a career change out of desperation or pain, you most likely will end up being unhappy again with just a different scenery around you.
Hmm.
And so if you're in that kind of situation, the first thing I would do is identify what is that feeling? What is the cause of that? The second thing I would do is look at your lifestyle. So typically when we advance professionally, we upgrade our lifestyle when we upgrade our salaries, right? And so if you don't have a cushion, if you don't have a reserves to shift gears or change a position, or just quit your job and explore what you're passionate about, then I would start with your lifestyle. Where can you cut back on some of your living expenses? And then that way you can build up that reserve, so you are able to say, I've got a time frame where there's an end in sight. And usually what we can do, even if we're unhappy, is hang on if we can see the end in sight.
I was actually wondering this because I was thinking of resourcefulness as a general skill as well, outside of the workspace, which is, given that it's like Mental Health Awareness Month as well as Mental Health Awareness Week, I was wondering, can you utilize this skill, which you can use in a work setting, but can you use this for your own kind of mental health setting as well?
Oh, I believe so. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just trying to find a way to kind of pivot those
Yeah.
skills, isn't it?
Yeah, and what fills your cup? So if what you're currently doing isn't making you fulfilled, then great, write a list of everything that's going to make you feel fulfilled. Start there. Say, okay, instead of always focusing on I don't have this or this is what's missing,
Mm,
focus on how can I create that? How can I make sure I get a little bit of that every day? Who can
yeah.
I surround myself with that's going to provide that, right? And it's just a matter of switching what we focus on to help us get through that. And I think a lot of times we're so worried on the external things and we look at
Mm,
ourselves last. And really, if we focus on what we need personally, then we can show up and be for other people different ways than if we're starting complete and what we need in order to show up and function and be there for other people or excel at a career. So I think
mm,
that's first and foremost is you got to take care of yourself, and that starts with mental, emotional, physical, all those components that make us. It's not just making sure we've got one or a few of those, it's all of those.
yeah, no, totally. And actually, there's the idea of learning. It's like the ability to keep learning is like critical to resourcefulness, right? So, do you feel like following the pandemic, more people will be upskilling? Because I know that I remember going to a talk with like this industry leaders who were saying that upskilling is going to be the next big thing. So do you
Mhm.
find that, like, especially with resourcefulness and having to learn, do you think this is people are actually going to shift towards a more resourceful mindset as a result?
Gosh, I sure hope so. Because what else forced us to be more resourceful than overnight we have a global pandemic and we haven't been faced with this in how many hundreds of years? And businesses, people, schools, countries had to figure out how to adapt, provide safety, and so many different things, and literally overnight, right?
Yeah.
And as we were learning more information and as we were gaining more information, we adjusted those things.
Yeah.
So it's I think that it's really going to force people 100%, because there are certain things that we have done for many many years that we were like, this will never change, and then all of a sudden now it's changed, and it
Yeah.
may never go back to what it there's going to be a new version of business and schools and learning and interactions and Zoom calls, right? Like, look
Yeah.
at us right
Totally.
here. Years ago this would have to be on Skype, and who has Skype anymore, right? There's so many different things that are now going to be a new norm.
Mm,
And I just really hope people took the time that, when everyone else kind of settled back and said, okay, well, let me just focus on, enjoying this time with my family or reorganizing my priorities, or that they took the opportunity to learn something new, to listen to podcasts, to hop
mm.
on and learn some things online when that's all you had available to you. And that's really my hope. My fear is that so many people took advantage of the time, and they're like, "Ooh, it's like a sabbatical. I'm gonna just sit back and relax and enjoy all this and stay away from people and not have my normal kind of routine." And it's a waiting game for them. And I think when the whole world wakes up, those people who treated it like a waiting game are going to be way behind.
Yeah, that's so true. And actually, I'm like, a lot of us are remote working at the moment. And I was just wondering, one thing we found especially is that it's really hard to keep a work-life balance as a result, because it's in your home now. So how do you audit your time, or how do you time block when, this has all been skewed?
Yeah. So I think that just comes down to boundaries and having a space in your home that when you're in that space, it's like work. And when you're in a different space, it's home.
Mm,
And sometimes that may be in the same room, right? So if you've
yeah,
got if you're using the kitchen island as your office, and then all of a sudden the sofa's right behind you and you're like, oh, that's where I hang out with my family, and there's nothing there to divide that space, you constantly see it, and it's very hard for us mentally to separate those two components. But so I just think having some boundaries around when I'm here, I'm in this role, and when I'm over here, I'm doing that role, and just kind of playing that part based off of the space that you have and when you're at home.
Yeah, I've literally covered my entire computer desk and everything with a giant bright yellow pineapple sort of print material. So it's just to keep some kind of separation and it
Yeah.
make it a bit jolly looking.
And
Otherwise it's just
I think too, if we always talked about like decompressing. So before, when I would travel home from an office, I had my 10-minute, my 15-minute commute home to kind of transition my brain from professional back to family or professional back to personal. And if I don't have that in a home, if I'm literally going from one side of the room to the other, I don't get that transition.
mm.
So I think it's like what I started doing was walking to the mailbox. So I'd go outside my house, I would walk to the
Ah,
mailbox. So when I came back in, it was like I'm walking back in as mom, as wife, as this is my sanctuary. I get to relax here and not produce here. And so it was just that kinesthetic movement of, okay, I'm opening the door and I'm walking in not as a business person, but as a mom and wife, and just having that kind of separation where I'm like, okay, this is now a new a new environment for me.
yeah, that's really smart actually, because I guess no one really divides their time like that, which is literally walking outside. That's really interesting because, and as you know, the balance is completely skewed at the moment. And there's a whole chapter on sort of being observant. And I like
Mm.
that, what you said, in order to be resourceful, you must learn to start being more observant. So how do you people watch and do those things when you're kind of stuck at home?
Yeah, that one's a little bit more tough. I think that's where tonality is going to come in. So if you're on the phone with someone, if you're on a Zoom, hopefully you can catch some of their movements and things. So it's just looking at some of the other senses. So if you can't look at body language, what else can you do to and tonality is a huge component of that.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay. Yeah. Because it is tough sometimes because I found like when I finally got to see people face to face, it was really odd. Like having to, it was a lot of work trying to figure out their facial cues. Like my brain just wasn't used to it.
Yeah.
Because we had been in lockdown for almost 3 months here. So it
Oh
was,
gosh.
yeah, it was a really long time not to see people. So it was a bit strange, those cues, those awkward silences.
Hmm.
Doing that over Zoom, it's slightly different because you can't talk over each other the way you do, say, in real life, where you're just kind of hubbub of
Hmm.
noise. But yeah, it's quite hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's we're learning to communicate digitally versus
Indeed.
face to face.
Yeah, well, now there's all this audio platforms coming up as well, so that's going to be interesting to
Yeah,
see.
like Marco
Yeah.
Polo and unique funny things like that where to communicate now it's very visual.
It is. And actually, so I'm like going slightly off topic, which is there's a sort of, the ending, which is apart from obviously taking full action on this plan, but to also seek inspiration from outside, so mentors, coaches. So, how do you find a coach, especially if you don't have the means as such? How do you find these people?
Yeah, so I think that whether it is a professional coach or not, I think that you can always learn from someone who has more experience than you do.
Mm,
And I don't mean experience in the exact same profession or going through the exact same thing. I think we can relate a lot just to people's challenges and struggles and whether how they overcame them. So you can seek inspiration online. There's so many different people that you can follow on Facebook and Instagram, podcasts, right? We have more connectivity than ever before. Like there's not a chance that I would probably ever run into um, Tony Robbins on the street, even though, we both live in the same state and chances are I'm never going to run into him. Right. Yet I have access to his books. I have like to his social media account, to his I can find that inspiration out there and he doesn't
mm.
charge me anything for that. So, and I also think too, a lot of those big gurus and motivational speakers, they went virtual. And so you could, instead of flying out to a conference and paying for airfare and hotel and a ticket for a 3-day event, I can now pay a way reduced fee for the same event on my computer
Mm,
and I get a recording of it. So
yeah.
I think that actually exposes people's audience so much more, and it's helping those who can't really invest that amount to go have a full-on experience to get that partial experience virtually.
Yeah, no, I guess in that way there's some real benefits to having gone completely online, isn't it? Especially during the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, everyone's now online. There
Mm-hmm.
was a period whilst I was stuck at home for a while because of a condition that I have, and so I was just bored because there was nothing there, nothing was online. So the pandemic has created a lot more opportunities in that sense because everyone is now in the same boat. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I was just like, okay, it's good to see all the coaches and everyone doing this now on over Zoom and things like that.
And even not in that industry, I mean, there were so many different people that had just heartfelt messages about, all kinds of things. And it's just great to see when people are hopping on that movement of let's just create positivity, because the news is terrible to watch, right? So
Yeah,
what can we do just to create some positivity, and to see kind of some things like that transpire, and have just your neighbors and friends and community participate in something like that can be very uplifting and inspirational.
awesome. Again, thanks, Kate. Really appreciate it. Any final words on resourcefulness from you?
I would just say lean into it. Resourcefulness, I truly believe, is the most underrated skill that we have in humans and in the workplace. And so I truly believe that if you lean into that, you can truly achieve some pretty amazing things.
Nice. I appreciate that. It's true because we don't really think about it until, yeah, you're in the situation and it's like,
And
so,
even then, you may not even identify it as resourcefulness,
no.
So it's just, I think, just learning a little bit more about that word. And I think there's a lot of other people in the space who refer to it but never really use the word resourcefulness. That's why I titled the book Figure It Out, because if you hear the people speak, they're either, okay, well, yeah, we can worry about that, we'll figure it out when we get to that point, or I don't know, we'll figure that part out. And it's, people use that term all the time without really understanding what it means. And so that's why I use that title for the book, because we say it and we don't really understand what that requires of us. And I believe that when we say it, it requires us to be resourceful.
I think you're right. And I don't even think people really understand the term resourceful, to be fair. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is always a bit tough, isn't it? So it's like,
Well, and even in the book, I think the definition doesn't even give a definition. It lists like being a problem solver. So it itself doesn't have its own real definition, which I think is kind of funny.
yeah,
So it's
it's,
up for interpretation.
indeed, indeed. Again, fantastic. Really appreciate talking with you, Kate.
Yes, thank
And
you so much.
yeah,
This was
it's really
fantastic.
enjoyable.